The words felt like a verdict falling from the ceiling of my life, heavy and final, the kind that leaves a ringing silence behind. I had reached a point where hope felt like a fragile glass already cracked, and the future I had built so carefully was now threatening to collapse because of one impossible truth. I needed a baby, not as a dream or a wish, but as a condition for survival in a world that had grown cold and transactional. Everything I owned, everything I had worked for, and everything I believed myself to be was standing on that single requirement, and the answer I received came wrapped in a condition that would change me forever. Before the story pulls you deeper, pause for a moment. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet miracles that happen when broken people choose compassion, please like this video, comment your thoughts, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps stories like this reach hearts that are still waiting to believe. My name is Michael Harris, and my life in Columbus, Ohio once looked like the picture of stability. I ran a modest but successful family-owned construction firm passed down from my father, a devout man who believed that legacy was not measured in money but in continuity. In his will, however, continuity had been written in a painfully literal way. The controlling shares of the company were placed in a family trust overseen by my stepmother, Ruth Caldwell, a woman whose faith was sharp-edged and whose smile never reached her eyes. The clause was simple and brutal: the company would remain under my control only if I produced an heir within 2 years of my father's passing. Otherwise, the business would be liquidated, and the profits donated to charities Ruth personally selected. It sounded noble on paper, but in practice it felt like erasure. The cruel irony was that my wife, Hannah Pierce, and I had tried for years to have a child. We prayed, we hoped, we endured appointments and hushed conversations in sterile rooms, and we smiled politely when relatives said it would happen when God wanted. When Hannah fell ill and passed away suddenly from an undiagnosed heart condition, the dream didn't just fade, it shattered. Grief hollowed me out, and time, instead of healing, pressed me harder against the deadline my father had unknowingly set. The house grew quiet, the walls echoing with what might have been, and every calendar page I turned felt like a countdown. Ruth watched all of this with an unsettling calm. She invited me to her home in suburban Cincinnati one evening, a place that smelled of polished wood and certainty. I laid out my desperation without pride, explaining that without a child, I would lose the company, the jobs of dozens of workers who trusted me, and the last living connection to my father. I admitted that I needed a baby or I would lose everything. Ruth listened with her hands folded, eyes steady, and when she responded, her condition landed like a test of faith I never imagined facing. She would help me retain control of the company by navigating the trust legally and ethically, but only if I agreed to something that felt impossible. I would have to raise a child not as an owner's heir first, but as a servant of compassion, dedicating a portion of the company's profits and my personal time to the foster system and adoption charities she supported. The child's origin, she implied, mattered less than the life I chose to build around that responsibility. At first, resentment burned through me. It felt manipulative, as though my grief and panic were being leveraged into moral compliance. But as days passed, the emptiness of my house pressed harder than my anger. I began volunteering at a foster care center in Dayton, partly to fulfill Ruth's expectations, partly because I had nowhere else to put my restless sorrow. There, amid worn toys and cautious smiles, I met Samuel Brooks, a quiet 4-year-old with watchful eyes that seemed far too old for his small face. He had been moved through 3 homes in 2 years, each transition leaving him more guarded, more silent. Caring for Samuel was nothing like the idealized vision of parenthood I once held. It was messy, exhausting, and emotionally raw. He woke screaming from nightmares, flinched at sudden movements, and clung to routines as if they were lifelines. I found myself learning patience in ways no business negotiation ever taught me. Slowly, without realizing when it began, my motivations shifted. The looming threat of losing the company faded into the background as Samuel's small victories took center stage, his first unprompted laugh, the day he held my hand without hesitation, the quiet trust that grew in his eyes. The legal process of adoption was long and invasive, scrutinizing every corner of my life. Ruth remained involved, not as a puppet master, but as a stern guide who insisted on accountability. She visited, observed, and challenged me when I defaulted to control instead of care. In those moments, I began to see her differently, not as a villain guarding my father's legacy, but as a woman shaped by her own losses and rigid beliefs, trying in her own flawed way to ensure that legacy was rooted in something meaningful. As the adoption finalized, something unexpected happened within the company. The charitable initiatives Ruth required began to transform the culture. Employees volunteered together, profits were reinvested into community housing projects, and the company's reputation grew not just for quality work, but for heart. Contracts increased, not decreased, and the fear that once dominated my thoughts loosened its grip. I realized that the condition I had once resented was quietly saving me from becoming a hollow man clinging to inheritance instead of purpose. Samuel's presence healed places in me I never addressed after Hannah's death. Through bedtime prayers and early morning breakfasts, I learned that love did not replace what I lost, it expanded around it. My grief found a place to rest, no longer the center of my identity. Ruth, too, softened in subtle ways, her visits less evaluative, more affectionate, her faith expressed through action rather than judgment. As this story nears its end, if it has touched your heart even a little, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your engagement helps spread stories that remind us love can grow from the most desperate circumstances. There came a day when the deadline passed quietly, without the catastrophe I once feared. The company remained strong, the trust conditions fulfilled in spirit as much as in letter. I stood in the backyard watching Samuel chase fireflies under an Ohio summer sky, and I understood something profound. I had once believed I needed a baby to keep everything I had. The truth was that I needed to lose my old understanding of everything to gain something infinitely better. Before this story ends, please leave a comment sharing what part moved you the most or what this story made you feel. In the end, the condition that once terrified me became the doorway to redemption. I did not save my life by meeting a demand, I found it by answering a calling. And in the quiet moments, when Samuel rests his head against my shoulder, I know that everything I thought I was losing was simply being reshaped into something worth keeping.